I feel like every single one of these conversations that we have begins with us bashing Substack
And the
technology.
funny thing is, we both like the platform. It's
We
just
do.
the
We do.
technology that you shouldn't need an advanced degree to use the technology for something,
No,
and it's just we're always grappling with that.
we are. All
Uh,
right. People are coming in. Let me take this opportunity to,
But
since this is,
Michael, we should celebrate the biggest achievement of the week. We've had peace in our time. Erica Kirk and Candace Owens, finally had a meeting.
did they? That's,
Yeah.
I didn't even know about that. Good for them.
Yeah, they had like a 4-hour meeting on Monday. I forget who brokered it, but this is a storyline, by the way. If you've paid any attention to the right, the Candace Owens, Erica Kirk, all that stuff, it's not worth your time. There are better things out there. Uh, the right is just an absolute flaming mess at just about every level right now, and they're going back and forth. Apparently, there's a Vivek Ramaswamy op-ed today somewhere destroying Nick Fuentes. Like that's where we are in GOP politics, saying there's
Yeah.
no place for Fuentes in the GOP coalition.
I'm just going to put something up on Twitter about this. Hope
Yeah,
everyone comes into the room.
yeah.
By the way, that whole thing with the CBS News thing is just, I mean, interviewing town hall with Eric Kirk is just so ridiculous. I mean, to CBS News under Barry White's leadership is just a joke.
Well, okay, so let me offer a slight counter perspective. I applaud Barry Weiss wanting to try things. I applaud the recognition that what CBS, what the mainstream media is doing is not going to work going forward from a money making standpoint. Um, and I also think that the idea that people talking across ideological lines is not a bad one. However, the specifics of this with Erica Kirk and the lack of pushback from Barry Weiss during the town hall um show that this is not necessarily the right model. And the other thing is, I don't really think the mainstream media gets that their audience doesn't want this. That their audience fundamentally, the people calling for more balance out of their programming are right of center and are not their consumers. They're not their
No,
customer base. That
no.
their customer base doesn't want Erica Kirk. They might enjoy, a town hall with like senator from each party or something like that. But they don't want Erica Kirk. And frankly, I don't think it was a particularly great idea, but I do think that the experimentation thing and the idea that we have to talk to each other like that element of what Barry Wise is doing makes sense to me philosophically, but I'm not sure that the execution worked here.
So I would say two things. First of all, my heart goes out to Erica Kirk. I mean that very sincerely.
Yeah.
What happened to her and to her children is unbelievably tragic, and I feel nothing but sorrow for what she's experienced. Nobody deserves what she went through, and certainly her kids, who will never know their father, do not deserve that either. Um, Having said that, I don't know that there's much to be learned or gained from a news perspective from interviewing her on a town hall.
No.
I really don't. I think that's the larger point here. There isn't
She's
much.
not a news figure. She's
She's not
not,
a news figure. No, she's
like
not.
I have felt differently if they had like spineless Mike Johnson. I hate him, but Mike Johnson's at least a news figure. There's some reason that you would give him that platform.
So, but I'll go on a deeper level on this too. And there was a really good piece in New York Magazine this week. Really good. It's an interesting piece about Barry Weiss, written by Charlotte Klein. And, she basically points out that Barry Weiss went to LA after she basically left the Times, cultivated this network of rich Hollywood executives and so forth, and all of whom who felt aggrieved about wokeness and the rise of the left, and saw her as somebody who was a kindred soul. And what the piece makes clear is that she has basically designed the free press and her journalism career around appeasing these rich, powerful people. And that's how she got the gig at CBS News. That's how she became popular. I mean, she's not really a good journalist. She's not a good writer. She doesn't, I mean, the FP didn't do journalism. It was basically a grievance board for people who didn't like wokeness. That's still what it is. Um, But what she's really good at, what she's brilliant at, is sucking up to rich people and telling them what they want to hear. And that's what the free press really kind of is. It's a grievance bulletin board for uh, white males. Well, not white males, white people in general who don't like wokeness. And that's what she's doing with this with CBS. Like David Ellison, who is one of the people that she, kind of lobbied or fawned upon, gave her this gig, and this is something that sort of will satisfy him and satisfy people like him who are Trump supporters and or sort of light Trump supporters, I guess, but people who are on the right. This is all just about appeasement
Eh,
of her
Da-
donors and her supporters.
David Ellison is not a light Trump voter. I think
I
I
guess he's
saw in
not. You're right.
Playbook
That's true.
this morning that he was having dinner with Ted Cruz yesterday.
Yeah.
So I tend to think that Barry Weiss is speaking to a certain subset of either slightly left of center or formerly slightly left of center types who are they're socially liberal by the standards of the Obama era. Um, and as the issue nexus has changed, they have moved rightward,
Yeah.
especially on trans rights in a lot of cases.
But also
Bill,
the whole Black Lives Matter and all the sort of language policing that went on after the
right,
George
and
Floyd
look,
murder and so
I think
forth.
language policing is stupid. I think language policing is, first of all, self-defeating. I think that it is often deployed hypocritically. I don't think it makes anyone's life any better. And I think that like I would prefer to fight the fights that I think are going to make people's lives better. But and the thing with the fight against wokeness is there are some people who have legitimate points on that side of the issue. Okay, but it's all very amorphous, and there's a lot of very pernicious people on the right who are trying to weaponize it to shut
Yeah.
down much more traditional liberal things. I
Yeah.
mean, and
That's
I
right.
say that as someone who was screaming in 2020 that defund the police was one of the dumbest ideas I ever heard,
Yeah.
because politically it doesn't work, and I freely admit that we in liberal institutions, I'm talking about the media here. I've worked with multiple publications and seen their style sheets. I've been affiliated with universities. We have moved a lot further to the left on a lot of this stuff than the rest of the culture and the rest of America more broadly has,
Yeah.
especially on language. And so I do think that Barry Weiss is tapping into something. And I also would pause to say that there's something kind of applause-worthy that the avatar of this is a lesbian woman who I believe just had a child.
She has two
Uh,
kids.
she has two kids. So like that is a sign of progress as far as I'm concerned for us as a society.
But I guess my problem is not really a substantive. Her what she's doing isn't substantive. It's basically grievance focused. And I at times people have sent me pieces in the free press, and I'm always struck by the blanket generalizations of many of the articles that I read that just cast with a wide net, that don't rely on data, that don't rely on facts, they don't appear to engage in fact checking. I mean, there's obviously in the early days, at least, and I think still probably up to this point, a lot of the pieces that were published there are just people she asked to write pieces for her. They weren't edited. They're just like grievance. They're just basically people complaining about things and in ways that aren't. Look, it's funny. I had this conversation with somebody who's actually a fan of hers and a fan of the free press, and she said, it's very opiniony. And I said, look, I'm no problem with opinion stuff. I mean, I'm an opinion columnist, but opinion has to be grounded in facts and evidence and data. It just can't be I don't like this and I think this is bad. You have to actually back up your arguments. And my experience reading the free press was that it just didn't. And that's not what she's interested in doing. But she wasn't interested in being a real journalist. She was interested in cultivating people who felt aggrieved, people, often wealthy people, often
Hey,
white, sort of heterodox thinkers, and that's who she cultivated. And
what
look, to her credit, it's been very successful for her.
I was about to say, as a business model, if I could make $150 million doing something, that's she's done well as an entrepreneur. But that's a little bit different from the journalistic point that
Of
Michael's
course,
making. She saw a niche opening in the market and has been enormously successful. I'm skeptical that she or anyone can revive any of the broadcasters.
no,
They're still the biggest forces, but that's in a fragmenting landscape. And I'm a little bit skeptical. I've worked extensively with John Dickerson. The fact that he's leaving is a red flag for me with
Yeah,
CBS. But like Scott Pelley just did an interview and said, "Look, we're doing the same stuff we always did. 60
I
Minutes.
saw
She's
that.
not
I saw that he
interfering
said that. Yeah,
at all." And I actually think she's a more complicated figure than anybody understands. Like the right likes to lionize her and hold her up, and I don't think they actually understand her. And the left likes to bash her and hate her, and I don't think they understand her either. I think she's more complex than people in terms of her own ideology and her own agenda. She reminds me more of like Bill Maher, who's started to drive me nuts in the last year or
another person
two.
I absolutely cannot stand.
You know what, Michael? I used to like him a lot. I saw him do stand up. He was a very funny man. And in the last few years, he's decided that his role is to be the liberal who scolds other liberals and that the right likes him
Yeah,
because of it.
exactly.
And I don't like that posture any more than people on the right like never Trumpers. Um, I think it's important to be able to criticize your own side, but when all you do is repeatedly criticize your own side,
Yeah,
and then you're trying to appeal to the other side. It's a market strategy that you're trying to appeal to the other side as hey, look, I don't like liberals, but hey, I like Bill Maher. You know,
the
I
bottom
watch
line
real
is
time.
it's just not honest journalism, and that's to me the bottom line about it.
Right.
She's not doing honest journalism. She's doing journalism that is has an agenda, and I just even if someone writes opinion for a living, I just don't like that. I will say one thing. It's sort of a funny story that about 15 years ago, I did a piece for Tablet on the at the time the Israeli labor leader named Shelley Yakimovich, and I went to Israel and I interviewed a bunch of people and so forth. And she was my editor for that piece. And if you had told me that 15 years later she'd be the president of CBS News, I would have had a good chuckle over that. So it's sort of remarkable to think where she has come. And it's kind of give her credit
Look,
for that, I guess, even if I don't respect at all what she does. But we need to
well,
get into yeah,
that's a little bit of a commentary on the media and what works today and what sells
it's true.
and where things are from a media standpoint. I mean, I hate to say this as somebody runs a publication and has seen click rates and different things. The more you're willing to throw out incendiary opinion stuff, the more you profit in today's landscape. And that's bad for society, but that's the reality of the media.
True.
Michael and I are too serious to ever be in that seven-figure salary tier. I
No,
think.
that's not going to happen. Not going to
Now,
happen.
now, if you want to come and tell all your friends to join us every week, hit that like button repeatedly. Surely we will make it. We will be the next big podcast. But I'll tell you, I'll give you another example, breaking news example from this. Right before we came on, Salem announced how they are going to replace Charlie Kirk in their midday block. Salem is for those who don't know, is the one radio company that has an explicitly ideological agenda. They will only program Christian music, Christian talk, and conservative talk. And they replaced Charlie Kirk with a guy from Breitbart for an hour and then 2 hours of Scott Jennings. And I bring this
Oh
up because
God.
Scott Jennings is the ultimate sellout. Okay.
Oh, it's the ultimate
Scott
sellout.
Jennings was a Mitch McConnell guy. He was Mitch McConnell's political guru. And we all know what Mitch McConnell thinks of Donald Trump. Well, Scott Jennings has reinvented himself as the guy who goes on CNN and says that Donald Trump would never say anything, could never do anything wrong. I mean, hell, David Urban, who's CNN's other like twist yourself into a pretzel to defend Trump guy, criticized him yesterday over Rob Reiner. We'll get back to that. But Jennings is the ultimate sellout.
Yeah.
He realized where there was money to be made and became Mr. MAGA. And between his podcast, his radio show, and CNN, I'm sure he's making a huge income out of
He's
it.
making a lot of money, more money than we are,
But
and he's doing it by being a sellout. But you're right. But let's get to the news. A lot going on this week. I want to start off, if I might,
this
with
week
the
today.
today. I mean, it's every day is a year in politics these days. Um, I want to mention first, lots to talk about. Obviously, the 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 thing I think is a worth jumping off point here is the latest Marist NPR poll, which is one of the top pollsters in the country. They have a new numbers out that has Trump approval rating at 38%. I remember saying to you a few weeks ago that I wondered if after the off-year elections, if you see the pollsters beginning to change some of their weighting and whether you'd see Trump's numbers fall below 40%, and that is happening. AP had him at 36% a few days ago, or last week, or recently. On the economy, his numbers are, again, the same, 38% approval. Democrats have a 5-point advantage on the issue, 5 points, which is significant. 7 out of 10 Americans say the cost of living in their area is unaffordable. That includes, by the way, half of Republicans and three-quarters of independents. And here's the thing I was really struck by, and this is not surprising necessarily, but among non-college educated white women, he is 6 points underwater. Among college educated women, his disapproval rating is 70%. That is,
He
that's
is
high.
trying to see how much he can lose with women. Like it's like a daily
It
goal.
does seem that way. And this week, he did something that even for Trump, who is one of the most deplorable human beings in my lifetime I've ever seen, after the tragic murder of Rob Reiner, we should say a second about that. Really was an awful story, broke on Sunday evening. Um, Whether, Rob Reiner, obviously very famous director, had a run in the 80s and 90s of movies that are amongst some of the most beloved movies, I think, in America today. Things like This Is Spinal Tap, which is, for me, a Mount Rushmore movie. I love that movie, one of my all-time favorite comedies. Harry Met Sally, Misery, Stand By Me, Few Good Men,
Man, yeah.
really good run of movies. But then
And
after,
by the way, I have to tell, I just finished editing a piece on this that we scrambled to rewrite. He got his start as in one of the greatest comedies of all time on television, All in the
Meathead,
Family.
his name was Meathead. That's how I always think
Yeah.
of him. He's always Meathead to me. Yeah, yeah. In fact, it's funny. When early days of Twitter, he used to retweet my stuff sometimes, and whenever he did, I'd always like retweet it back and say Meathead, because that's how I thought of Rob Reiner as that
Well, the
character
funny thing
from.
was we're reshaping this piece, and for those who don't know, I edit a history section called Made by History that is runs a time, and we had this piece on how the history of All in the Family explained why South Park can do things to Trump that no
Yeah,
one else
sure.
can, and we had to scramble to rewrite it. And as the author put in there that Meathead's name was actually Mike, and I was the first time I knew that because
Oh
I
yeah,
always knew him as Meathead.
that's funny. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
look, that show was incredibly influential. I remember when I watching when I was a kid. I don't think I totally understood the politics of it, obviously, but it was a great show, and like I said, that's how I think of Rob Reiner. Um, anyway, so of course, tragically, he was murdered along with his wife on Sunday evening by their son, which just makes the horror of his death so much worse. And Donald Trump, in a dominable Donald Trump style, puts out uh, um, a tweet that basically suggests that Reiner was dead because he suffered from Trump derangement syndrome, and that it was his own fault because he had such obsessive hatred for Trump, and basically just made the thing all about Trump, and no sense of commemoration or sense of sorrow for the passing of Reiner. By the way, I was struck by the fact that a lot of prominent Republicans, people like Ted Cruz, for example, put out very heartfelt, condolences about it, about his loss. And I think, by the way, part of the reason for
Laura
that is
Ingraham
Laura Ingraham,
said
a lovely
she,
thing.
yeah, because she apparently met him at a restaurant in LA one night and got to talking, and he came on her show the next day.
Yeah, right, right. So that's the one thing about him that I think is Ty Burr, who is a former film critic at the Boston Globe. He's a Substack now. He had a great piece where he said, "Look, you know, Robert wasn't necessarily a great artist, but he's a great mensch," and that comes
Yeah.
across in almost all the commentary. People who knew him just said nothing but positive things about him. And I think,
And for those of you who are tuned in because we're two bearded Jews, there's no higher compliment than calling someone a mensch.
absolutely, it's a nice compliment. And by the way, Rob Reiner is a bearded Jew, absolutely. But I think what was striking about Trump's statement, I mean, besides just how revolting it was that there was actually pushback. I think it actually kind of broke through a little bit. A lot of Republicans, actually, Nancy Bice, Bice, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Congressman of Oklahoma,
No, you're conflating two people. I think you're conflating Nancy Mace and Stephanie Bice. I
Stephanie
think
Bice,
it's
sorry.
Stephanie Bice from
She's a
Oklahoma
congressman from
City.
Oklahoma City, and he basically rebuked what Trump said to Mike Lawler from New York. Um, you know, he- I think for a lot of people, what he said went too far. And I think people were offended by it. And it's actually, but I bring it up because in context of his poll numbers, I think it's one more example of why Trump is doing so poorly. I think people don't like him. And I think he is such an unappealing person, and his personality has become even more unappealing than it was before. His grievances, his just revolting statements about people, his open racism. I think it's just become harder and harder to defend the man. And for some Republicans, they won't do it anymore. But I think for some of his former supporters, they won't do it anymore either. Not to mention the fact that he simply isn't delivering on the promises that he made when he ran for president, and the economy is in terrible shape. So I do think this is a recurring refrain on Two Bearded Jews, but Trump's numbers are bad, and they're going to stay bad, and it's a big problem for the Republican Party. And I don't see any reason. And I think again, his Rob Reiner tweet is just one more example of why he's doing so poorly.
It's actually a compounding force, I think. This poll had him at 36% on the economy. It was the lowest number in either term, and had Democrats favored on the economy 40 to 35, which is almost unheard of.
Yeah,
You go back to even the W. Bush years, or even the 90s, Democrats were always ahead in everything else, but
yeah.
it was the economy. People were like, oh, Reagan, low taxes, that kind of thing. And I think that the compounding effect is there's a lot of people who voted for him despite the fact that they didn't like some element of it. They thought he was good for the economy, but they didn't like his tweets, for example. And what's happening is, as his approval on the economy goes down, they're noticing that stuff more, and they're being annoyed by it even more. They're saying, okay, this guy is too busy saying terrible things and not actually fixing the economy, or
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
too busy doing this. you know can he actually focus on people's lives? And I think that is a real problem. Now, I think this was something of a freebie for Republicans who are looking for ways to
A little bit,
distance themselves from
a little bit.
him
Yeah,
without
definitely.
arousing his ire. I think that's one reason they all glommed onto the Epstein files, along with the fact that it's very important to their base. Susie Wiles was explaining that in the Vanity Fair piece that we'll talk about later, but that there's a narrow subset that cared about that. But, realistically speaking, I think that this is one of those things where they can take a shot at him and know that he's not going to care too much, and know that it has no impact. They're not voting against him on a major agenda item or something like that. Whereas had Joe Biden said something like this about someone who had died, that had been calling for
Yeah,
impeaching
it's
him.
impeachment,
I
and probably
mean,
Democrats would too. I want to just mention one thing, the comment we got, Lynn Muster. And by the way, Lynn did mention earlier The Princess Bride as another Rob Reiner movie, a movie
great
that
movie.
I've never actually was a huge fan of that movie, but I have to say, like, if you grew up in the 80s, I mean, every sleepover, every party, that movie was being shown. It is, for a
I
lot
don't
of people,
know.
it's a
Ferris
lodestar.
Ferris Bueller is
Yeah,
the other.
that's a little earlier, but yeah, you're right. That's a big one too. That's a big one too. But I was going to say, I thought even earlier would be the airplane movie, which is a personal favorite of mine. But I want to go back to a second. She said that if it wasn't for the economy, would people be talking about his vileness or the vile things that he says? And one point I'll make about this, I think it's worth keeping in mind, is that in Trump's first term, the economy until the pandemic was quite strong. Economy was doing quite well, and Trump's numbers were bad, which would suggest that people uh, didn't care about the economy, and they were just didn't like him and didn't like things he was doing as president. I suspect that that's a lot of why his numbers are so bad right now. Something that I think people don't appreciate in American politics that's been happening since the sort of Obama years is that it used to be from the 70s on that the president's approval rating and the electorate's views on the economy were basically synonymous, right? If you thought the economy was doing well, generally speaking, you thought the president was doing a good job. So those numbers there was not much of a gap between them. But that gap began to appear during the Obama years, and it grew to enormous proportions during the Trump years because, again, economy doing well, people not approving of him. So I actually don't know that. It's interesting about this. I think the assumption is that his numbers are bad because people are upset about the economy. And there's a lot to that. I don't think that's the only reason why his numbers are bad. And I think his numbers would be bad even if the economy was not underperforming. I think the economic underperformance is probably what drags him down among Republicans or right leaning independents. But among Democrats, among the 48% of the country that voted for Kamala Harris, they were never really going to be on Donald Trump's side. They were always, I think, going to be opposed to
Well,
him. But hold on. He got 49.5% in the last election. If you're 38%, you lost, almost 12 points. That's not just coming from people who didn't vote for you. There are people who voted for him who don't like him. So I think it's probably a combination of the economy, people said about the economy, but also people just unhappy with who he is and what he does and says as president.
I think that and some of this is just polarization, and some of it's the uniqueness of Trump. He has, at least to this point, had a uniquely high floor. He's never gotten down to George W. Bush or Jimmy Carter territory in the 20s, high 20s. He's sort of bottomed out in the for his overall approval, like 37, 38. And
Little
that's
higher than that.
yeah, well, I think that the this
Like in
Marist poll had
in
him
the
at
first term, it was like his numbers bottomed out around the low 40s.
yeah, I mean, like this Marist poll has him at 38. So like
Right,
he's
right,
in the
right. That's lower.
high. Right, he's in the like high 30s, but there was always that level that like W. Bush and Carter got to in the high 20s that was like we're really disgusted with you second, in Bush's case in his second term, like go away, like we want this guy gone. The warning bells are clanging. And Trump's always avoided that. But there is also a very passionate core of like 48, 49% of Americans who absolutely loathe him.
Yeah,
um, and that means that if you start alienating even slivers of the rest of the population, you're going to go down, and you're going to go down pretty hard. And I think that there's a lot of risk, especially because they've lost Latino voters over some of their immigration stuff and over the economy. Very, very strong swing back to Democrats. And they claim that there was Leanne Caldwell did an interview with Richard Hudson yesterday, who's the from North Carolina, and he was saying, "Look, we understand that what we've got to do is focus on Hispanic voters and turning them out in 2026. Like the competent
yeah. Be careful what
we're
you wish for on that one, buddy. Seriously.
well, that's the thing is he was like confidently predicting they're going to hold the house even under the worst case scenario. Susie Wiles said that too in Vanity Fair, and I just chuckled because they're either deluding themselves or projecting because they're
Yeah,
not going to hold the house.
I'd be
Um,
very
but
surprised.
there's some real ground for him to slip, and I mean I think that the other thing with Trump is he feels completely shackled.
Yeah,
And if you read that this Wiles thing that was in Vanity Fair, we'll talk about it more fulsomely in a minute. But she says basically that he has said to her on multiple occasions, even when he muses, "Oh, we're doing so much good. I wish I had another term." He said, "No, I've had my two terms. I've had my chance. Someone else is going to get to do it." He
yeah.
understands
Please, that's
that.
not what he says.
No, I mean
See, that's a level of introspection that Donald Trump is incapable of.
that part is true, but I do think that he genuinely understands that like he's a lame duck. It's a second term, and he feels completely free to do whatever the hell he
Yeah,
wants
he doesn't
and
give a
say
shit.
whatever the
Doesn't
hell he
care.
wants.
Doesn't
He
care.
doesn't care at all, and that runs the risk that there's a lot more Rob Reiners coming between now and election day in
Oh,
November.
100 days. 100%.
You
And I
know,
think that's the key point here that he can't
Michael,
help himself.
are you excited for his Christmas screening next week for us haters and losers, where he tells us to have Merry Christmas?
Well, I'm going to bring two more things really quick. You got a comment, CC Blue said, more important than economic ability is character and morality. You cannot manage money legally and ethically if you don't have a depraved and more immoral character, as Trump has. Look, I agree with you, but the reality is that a lot of voters were okay with
No,
his depraved character and morality. The thing is that I think it was a lot easier to look the other way at that when he wasn't president. Now that he is president, it's much harder to.
I can guarantee you that if a president got the economy to record levels and people felt if that number of people feeling like the economy is working for them was at 85%, then a president could literally go out and start shooting people and they wouldn't
No, but
care.
I don't agree with you because I think if you, again, I'm going back to what I said earlier. If you look at Trump's first term numbers, the economy was operating on all cylinders the first 3 years of his presidency. And his numbers were bad because people didn't like his
I,
character and the things he
I'm
did and
not
said.
talking about approval here. I'm talking about election. I'm talking about he could get reelected. A president could do a lot of really immoral things and get reelected if people thought that that president was doing good things for the economy, even if they disapproved of a lot of other
I,
stuff that they were
I
doing.
I'm going to push back on that because I go back to what I just said. I mean, if you look at the poll, look before the pandemic hits in March of 2020 to 2020. If you look at the head-to-head polling between him and Biden, he never led Biden in head-to-head polling, not once, going back to November of 2019. Uh, and I think there is something to be said for the fact that people by that point in time had just had enough of him and just couldn't stand him.
I agree with
And
that.
if you look at his approval numbers, right, from March 2020 to November 2020, they were largely unchanged. People
But
made their minds up. So I know people think the pandemic cost them the election, and I don't agree with that. I think it cost them the election when people just didn't like him and didn't want him
I
president anymore.
I agree with that. I'm making a narrower point. I'm talking about the
I understand what you're
morality.
saying. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm talking
I
about
hear
the
that.
morality. I think that some of them being tired of him in the first term was about chaos and policy and things
Yes.
he was doing, not just that he was immoral and,
Yeah, yeah.
corrupt and those
That's
kinds
right.
of things. I'm
Yeah.
saying that if you get a guy who was competent and they like what he's doing on the economy and there's no chaos, but he does a lot of immoral things or he's, loading his own pocket, I think people don't care about that. They
Look,
should, but they
this is
don't.
look, this might be a bad analogy and one that people won't agree, won't like too much. But, look, I think about Bill Clinton after the Lewinsky affair, right? I mean, his behavior was immoral. It was unethical. It was gross. But people were like, economy is doing pretty well. I don't give a shit. That's a reality. I mean, that's the reason why Democrats, picked up seats in 98 midterms. So, I mean, I think Clinton's behavior
And,
eventually did
and
have an effect in 2000. I think the whole restore honor and dignity to the White House, which was Bush's sort of tagline, I think, or slogan, I think was effective because of what Clinton had done. But
I,
if
I
Clinton
I
had
would
ran for re-election, I don't think it would have cost him.
right. I actually think that where it hurt Clinton or it hurt Democrats was that Gore wouldn't embrace Clinton and the
He
Clinton
couldn't
Gore
embrace him. He
economy
couldn't.
because of that. Yeah,
No, but he couldn't.
no, but he could have embraced the Clinton Gore economy. Said, look, I don't always, I don't agree with the way President Clinton's conducted himself, but look at our economy, and that's what I'm going to continue. I'm going
That's a
to
fair point.
be
But that's a fair point. But I'll just say this to the record, and I take this from having spoken to some of Clinton's pollsters. If you look at they basically the reason why Clinton did go on the campaign trail in 2000 is because everywhere he would have gone, he would have hurt Gore. That's a reality. I mean, he did, and look, that's not just because of Lewinsky. It's also because the whole third term issue. No party's won a third term. It happened in '88. Before that, it happened in '48.
but
It's very hard for a party to win three elections in a row in this country. Very, very difficult.
I I brought this up before, and you look at '88. How did they do it? They said, okay, our guy is unpopular. Our party has had 8 years, so let's make people absolutely hate the other guy because
Yeah,
that's the only way you can win that third term.
but you don't win
Um,
by
eh,
like 10 points based on that alone. I mean, people were not upset with the incumbent party, and they were happy with the economy, and that's enough to win.
right. The economy was relatively good. And I mean, I think this was probably in retrospect something that a lot of us should have focused on more in 2016
Yes,
was the third term effect. And
third
we
term
all looked
effect.
at it and said, Trump is the antithesis of what can win the presidency because that had always been the case. And hey, Republicans fumbled their shot at their third term,
Th-
but
that's
or stopping a third term.
exactly the mistake that I made. And I will say
Yeah.
for the record, I my prognostication on elections generally is pretty good. The two biggest fuck ups were 2016 and 2024. 16, like I just got that completely wrong. But I think part of the reason was because I just thought that Donald Trump was so toxic and so awful. I mean, 2016, I spent a lot of time on the campaign trail following Trump around. I was in Cleveland for the convention. I did events all over the country with him. And my conclusion from doing that was that no one could vote for this man. He's just so fucking awful. And I do think that I was in a bubble. I didn't even talking to his supporters, I just could not believe that he had that kind of support, but he did. And same thing in 2024. I didn't believe people would put him back in office, and I was wrong. Um, I got 2020 right. I got 2018 right. I got 2012 right. But 2016 and 24 were fuck ups. And I think because Trump, it's so upends, I think, the way we think about politics in this country.
Right,
And
right, right. I mean, here's the thing about politics, and Michael and I and everyone else out
That's a
there,
good.
even
That's a good segue. Here's a good politics.
it,
Like I'm waiting, like
go
very
nice and broad.
profound to come out of your mouth right now, Brian.
Um, but we are telling you we are offering analysis that is based on what we know, based on what
Yeah,
has always happened, what has always been. If you get in those moments, and there are, periodically every 25, 30, 40 years, we get a moment where everything changes in American politics, then a lot of people who are offering you good, sober, serious analysis are going to be wrong. And a lot of
yeah.
crackpots are going to be right. And, we saw that after 2020 and with some of these right wing pollsters who, oh, they were more right than the mainstream guys because there was a polling error. And then everybody relied on them in 2022 and predicted a wave and they looked stupid. Um, but you get the like crackpot broken clock right twice a day thing or
No,
that you get.
can I
And
just say
it's just
for
about
yeah,
the new
sorry.
moment.
I couldn't agree with you more. I just want to like highlight. It's funny you said this is the thing about politics, and then you made like a really profound argument about politics. It was very impressive, Brian. I could not agree with you more. What you said is exactly right, and something I think people need to keep in mind. You cannot tell. Neither one of us or anybody can tell us how 100 and however many million Americans vote are going to vote. Right? We can only base it on what we know from past experience. Right? And what the polls are showing us at the time. But past experience is usually the best explainer of what's going to happen in the future, at least in politics. It has been for a long time. What happened the last couple of years in American politics is very much and I make this point all the time that we've gone the last four elections from a Democrat winning in 2012 to a Republican winning in 16, Democrat in 20, Republican in 24. That hasn't happened since the 1890s. We have had in 16, 20, and 24, each party winning its own governing trifecta. That's never happened in American politics. I mean, I
And
grew
by
up
the
at a time.
way,
Yeah.
I'll throw in 16, 20, and 24. The incoming president's party lost House seats, three straight
Yeah.
elections.
Right, right. And also, by the way, just as a sidebar, between 1912 and 1988, we had three one-term presidents. Well, who lost re-election or didn't run for re-election. But they all ran. It was Taft, Carter, and Bush, and they all lost. Well, two of them lost because of bad economy, and Taft lost because the Republican Party was
Ford
vote.
too,
Yeah, he wasn't
but
elected. He
he
wasn't
wasn't
elected.
elected.
He's Nixon's second term. So that's how
Right,
I count that. I wouldn't count him
right,
as as a incumbent.
right.
But we've had that's three times in basically 100 and no, I'm sorry, three times in 76 years I think it is, or no, 80 years. Sorry, we had it happen twice in the last 4 years with Trump and then Biden. So we're in a very different period, and so a lot of what we see happening in American politics now is stuff that we haven't seen before and we're not used to, and it does make it difficult to sort of predict what's going to happen. I mean, I remember in 2022, the data suggested overwhelmingly the Democrats were going to do well in that election. But I had a hard time believing it because the historical evidence is very clear what happens in midterm elections, especially when the economy is doing poorly and the incumbent president is unpopular. The incumbent party loses. That is how this goes always. I mean, almost always, I should say. It's very, especially in a first term midterm. The only major exception is Bush in 2002, and that's because of 9/11. So I looked at them, like I said, okay, the polling and special elections suggest to me Democrats are going to do well, but but then I say historically that doesn't really make sense. So it's very difficult to sort of when you're dealing with sort of sui generis political moments, which we've experienced quite a few of in the last couple of years. It's hard to get the analysis correct and get the predictions correct because you are dealing with sort of situations you never encountered before. And I guess to that point, I'd like to say this is why I don't do predictions anymore because I think it's first of all we shouldn't do predictions. This isn't really our job to do predictions, and I actually kind of kick myself for ever having done them in the first place. It's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to sort of say what we look at what's happening, what the data tells us is going to happen. We shouldn't say I think we're going to win 40 seats or this whatever. So I mean, but we can sort of. I mean, but before 2022, I certainly said it looks like Democrats are going to do okay, and that turned out to be correct. But again, like I think Brian's point is just spot on. Like we do look at politics through the lens of what came before and what
Yeah.
historically we have seen. And when you deal with historically abnormal events, it throws things off. It makes it hard to figure out
Right,
what's going to
right.
happen.
Right, and I'm saying that, to be honest with all of you out there about
Yeah.
the limitations of what we do. We work hard at
Yes.
this. I can tell you, I spent 2 hours reading the news this morning just to prepare to be on
Yeah.
and doing this. We have a lot of historical knowledge. We follow these things really closely. But if something's going to change, it's really hard to see that in advance.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
mean, I laid out for my subscribers two scenarios, like the Monday before the election, 2024. The like, here's why Trump would win and it would make sense, and here's why Harris would win. It would make sense. And I went with Harris, but I didn't feel particularly good about that because there were two very plausible scenarios based on the past about how this would go, and it was all a question of how much does Donald Trump skew what we know from the past.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
this is something to keep in mind when the midterms next year
Yeah.
because if you look, there are three midterms since 1934 in which the president's party has done okay. There's 1998 when Republicans were absolute fools. They looked at the polling and said, "Don't impeach Bill Clinton,"
And
and
they
they
impeached
said
Bill Clinton.
they impeached Bill Clinton anyway. And they lost
Yeah.
five House seats, and they split in the Senate and didn't gain anything. And Newt lost his leadership role over that and resigned from the House over that. Then in 2002, you had a weird confluence of factors. You had 9/11. There was also a
Yeah.
redistricting cycle where they
Yeah.
gained seats because of that. And Democrats had a weird recruiting cycle. They had a bad recruiting cycle in the Senate. And then you had that Paul Wellstone memorial service that ended
Yeah.
up
Yeah. Yeah.
costing
Yeah.
them two seats in the Senate.
Maybe. Maybe.
Well, at least that was the conventional wisdom at the time. Is it
That was the
cost them in
conventional wisdom.
Minnesota and it cost them in Missouri. Um, and so they ended up losing seats. And then we have 2022. And even in 2022, you had a weird geographic breakdown. In some places, you had the red wave in California and New York and the Southeast. And then in other places, Democrats, it would have looked like it was a blue wave
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Colorado and Washington State. And I think a lot of that was Dobbs. I mean, my theory always was that it was in the places where a Democratic candidate could legitimately say, if you vote for me, I will protect abortion
Yeah.
rights.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that.
And
Totally agree with that.
and that didn't exist in the Southeast, and it wasn't necessary in California or New York. So,
Can I interject one thing there that
yeah,
frustrates me about this? Because after 2022, I made this observation repeatedly that abortion was only an issue in places where what you just said, where it actually could make a real difference for people.
yeah.
Like abortion did not help Democrats in red states. It just didn't help in Florida, which by the way, bizarrely enough, by 2022, there was probably no state in the country where the polling showed more support for abortion rights than Florida. It was certainly one of the top three or four. I think it was number one actually, and yet Republicans, trounced Democrats in Florida. So I think I assumed that I knew that, and then I sort of still thought 24 that abortion would be a huge issue, and it just wasn't. Um, but I will just say for the record, like I think, t- you know, to your point, like I look at next year's midterms, and if you ask me now, I think Democrats are have a very good chance of absolutely trouncing Republicans. I think this is not a blue wave. I think it's gonna be a tsunami. But you know what? What the fuck do I know? It's 11 months out, and I mean, it
Uh,
looks that way now. Things can People say a lot can change in politics. That's actually not true. A lot doesn't change in politics. Well, so this is actually one of my other things too. Like usually, where people feel now or at the beginning of the year is how the thing will turn out. It's very, very rare, especially in the midterm, that voter attitudes change during the year. If people
I,
don't like the incumbent party in December or January, they don't like him in November either. So I think if you look at this, I think Democrats are going to win big. But, and this is what I want to get into. I mentioned this in my post in my Truth of the Consequences today. There's a good piece in Politico that came out, which points out because of redistricting and partisan gerrymandering, it is very hard for Democrats to actually have a tsunami election because there
well,
aren't that many seats that are narrowly contested.
First of all, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying on the economy and stuff. Like, I think that they have about 2 months because I think there's like a 3 month lag or 4 month lag after something changes. And I think people's perception hardens after Memorial Day
Oh no,
on
but
who
well
they're going to
before
vote
that.
for.
Well before that.
But certainly that's the break point beyond which you have no hope.
Pretty
But
much.
where I was frustrated by that Politico piece is Democrats are in much, much, much better shape than they were. They won 40 seats in it picked up 40 seats in 2018, and I believe they need to pick up 20 to reach the same number of House seats this time. They are certainly, the playing field is certainly worse for them. There are not a bunch of Republicans sitting in Harris one districts who are ripe for picking them off. Okay, that is absolutely true, and you haven't had some of those districts open up to become open seats, which makes them that much more susceptible. But you need half as many seats here. And I can paint a picture in which they are gaining 3 seats in Pennsylvania, two
Yeah.
seats in Michigan.
But
I
I guess the point is like if they win 20 seats, that may be equivalent to winning 40 seats
yeah,
8
absolutely.
years ago because it's
Let's
just
put
harder to win 40 seats than it used
let,
to be.
let's talk in absolute terms here, Michael. Like 235 might be about a ceiling for either party in our current moment.
Yeah, that's a
In the
great point.
House.
You might be right about that.
That would be a 20 seat gain for Democrats because what Michael is saying and what this Politico piece was getting at is they were dealing with just the districting piece. But the bottom line is the electorate is a lot less elastic than it used to be. If you go
Yes,
back to the
great
80s
word.
and the 90s, there were a lot of people who could vote for Ronald Reagan and vote for Democrats down ballot
A liberal
or
Democrat in Congress.
right.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that is gone at this point. And so in that environment, there's a lot less elasticity. In fact, I think people are actually getting it wrong when they describe midterms. A lot of the reporters are getting it wrong because they're looking at midterms as some sort of like backlash against the president. But I think it's more that, and I actually saw a Republican, I forget who said this last week, but I thought they were right that like the people who are angry show up in midterms, and those are the out party. The people whose
Yeah,
party won the White House, who is getting the stuff they wanted done, tend to be more complacent. They're
they stay
not as
home.
focused. They stay home. That's why we get waves. It's not necessarily the repudiation of the president's agenda that everyone always makes it out to be. Sometimes it can be. But like if you look at some of the after studies of like 1994, it wasn't that a whole bunch of Americans who voted for Bill Clinton turned on him so much as
They
a
just stayed
lot of
home.
people they stayed home, they were ambivalent, they weren't as enthused, and the people who were furious would walk, across broken glass to vote were the Republicans.
So let me add one point to this. One of the reasons why Republicans didn't always do as poorly in midterms is because well, going back to periods when Republicans were Republican president, was because Republican voters were always pretty consistently going to the polls and voting. Right, the Republican electorate
They
was
were
much.
older,
They were older. They were more
educated.
educated. They tended to vote more. Now that is completely flipped in the past 10 years. So there's two things working for Democrats, which is why, look, I said this in 2024, a week after the election. Democrats are probably going to win the midterm in 2026 for two reasons. One is there'll be a backlash to Trump, and that has happened. Which, by the way, I'm not a genius. This was not hard to figure out there'd be a backlash because there
I
always
think
is.
Baxter predicted that too.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I think Baxter could have predicted that. It's not. I do not deserve kudos for that one. Although, having said that, a lot of relatively like people I think are smart Democratic pundits didn't seem to recognize this, which I think is more about not having their own sort of ideological agenda. The second thing is the Democrats are now the party that votes. They are the more consistent voters than Republicans. So you put those two factors together, a backlash against Trump and a voter base that is much more consistent, which if you flip it around, a Republican voter base that is less consistent to vote. And that's how you get a wave election. That's how you got 2022, actually, in a lot of respects. The funny thing about politics now, people don't seem to realize, because people think, oh, Republicans dominate, is that Democrats actually have a really strong structural advantage. Not structural, they're screwed on structure. They have a strong electoral advantage in midterm elections because their base of voters is more likely to vote. You see this in special elections already. This is why Democrats are outperforming Harris by 13 or 14 points, right? Because they are the ones who they vote. But you're also seeing in midterms. I do think it's part of the reason why they did so well in 2022, contrary to the historical trends. So this flip side of this is that why do Democrat Republicans do well? Well, because of Trump. And this is where I got wrong about 2024 is that there is a coterie of voters, more than a coterie, a significant percentage, 5, 10, not enormous, but 5, 10%, who are Trump only voters, who will turn out when Trump's on the ballot and will actually push his numbers up in a way that I don't think any other politician can do, which is why I think he wins in 24 and yet doesn't have the sort of coattails to bring other Republicans along. I mean, one of the most interesting stats from 2024 that no one talks about is that Trump won every swing state and yet and Republicans lost 4 of the 5 Senate races, which is pretty unusual. That did not happen in 2018. 2018, red states, places where Trump had won, Democrats did poorly. Republicans would do very well.
They
I mean, they were
lost despite a wave. I mean,
actually
then that
2020. Actually, 2020 is a better example. And well, 2020, that's not a good. The point I'm getting at 2024, you didn't have the coattails in 2024 for Trump, and so I think what
16
that.
might be the best example that you're looking for, where Republicans won Senate races in Wisconsin, they won
Yeah.
Senate races in
Yes.
Pennsylvania.
Yes. Yes.
The only 2 seats they lost were Illinois and New Hampshire, which were places that Trump lost.
Yes. So I think that's right. Thank you, Brian. I think you said it better than I could. So, but the thing is, what's a problem for Republicans is twofold. It's threefold. One is that you get into a midterm election, that Democrats have an advantage in midterm elections because of this. I mean, an advantage could be just limiting their losses, which is what happened in 22. They limited their losses because they get their voters to come out and vote. But in 28, I think where the Republican advantage, which should happen on the presidential level, may not be there because Trump isn't running. And if those occasional voters who voted for Trump in 20 and 16 don't come out and vote in 28, Republicans are in big, big political trouble. I mean,
I think
people don't realize how much of a problem this is for Republicans. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
think that Trump has two unique advantages over other Republicans. One, because he made his entrance into the public's consciousness as a celebrity, not as a
Yes,
politician, not as being in politics. He can, for people who are angry at the system, he has got something unique of like, this is the guy who can blow up the system. He is the true outsider. People have favored outsiders going back to Jimmy Carter in 1976 and the
Barack Obama.
backlash to Watergate, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Ronald Reagan, all governors.
Yeah,
We're talking about people not from DC, this like
Bush is
anti-DC.
that's a tough one, but yeah, okay, I'll
Yeah,
buy
but
it.
I'm simply saying he's a governor. He was not
Yeah,
from
yeah,
DC.
yeah,
Had no
that's fair.
DC experience. In
But
fact, they picked Cheney
he was more the
because
establishment candidate than, for example, John McCain, right?
yes, but it was a more establishment because of his daddy than it was
Well,
like
yes,
his
yeah,
daddy's
yeah, but I'm
fundraising
saying, yeah,
network.
that may be, but he had
But
establishment
I,
support.
but I'm talking about is voters. I'm saying voters have preferred people from outside DC, outside the establishment. Trump took that to the next degree. They're frustrated with the system. He says, I'm going to blow it up. So that's a unique appeal. The other unique appeal is he has a celebrity to him that other politicians do not
Yeah,
have, by which I mean he's very good at generating attention. He's very good at dominating news cycles. He's very good at um I think that if you this is going to be in show how this comes out because I've had trouble figuring out this point for a while. But for people who are okay with him, there's a playfulness to him. They don't take him totally seriously. They see him as a bombastic character,
yeah,
sort of like one he played on reality TV or in professional wrestling. They see him as this character
yeah.
Trump, and they figure that a lot of what he's saying is it's entertaining, and he's not actually going to do the worst stuff and that gives him something that where it's like JD Vance could say the exact same thing and people would not give him the same free pass for it.
That's right.
And I think it's going to be one of the problems that JD Vance runs into in 2028 is that he comes off as much less authentic. Um, and or maybe not authentic, but he comes off as like a more classic politician.
So I would just say at this point we should move on from this topic, but I want to talk about Susie Wild again. But let me just say, to agreement with you, I wrote this piece years ago that made the argument that one of the reasons why Trump does very well is because, and I'm not being facetious here, because he's mentally ill. When I say that, I'm saying that Trump has a profound personality disorder that allows him to say absolutely batshit crazy things that violate not just political norms but social norms. I mean, what kind of an asshole after like Rob Reiner is killed, his wife is murdered by their son, goes out and like mocks that person? Like you have to be just a horrible human being, but you also have to just not understand basic social mores to do something like that. That's
Right.
Trump.
And by the way, Michael and I said this about people on the left after Charlie Kirk. I mean, I remember saying it to people who were celebrities. It's just a common decency that, like, this guy was just murdered.
Yeah,
So I'm going to hold my negative thoughts about him for a few days.
yeah,
It really is basic common decency
yeah, yeah.
that,
Exactly,
you
exactly.
know,
And so, but I think, but the point is that Trump doesn't understand that. And that's what those things he says, not this Rob Reiner statement, but in general, the things he says that are so like just violating of basic social norms are the things that people like about him. The people who like him, they like that he says those things. And when other Republicans try to do that, they can't because they're not crazy. And so it looks insincere and phony, right? So I remember seeing Ted Cruz trying to, the campaign trail in 16, trying to imitate Trump. And he just comes across as unctuous and not trustworthy because he is. And so I think that's the problem. Nobody can recreate the insanity of Trump because they're not insane.
the,
But
the,
let's talk about
well,
Susie Wild. Yeah, yeah.
you just segued for us. You offered me not just one, but two segues there.
Oh,
The
look at
first
me.
is
Oh, we didn't even plan that,
Susie.
guys. Nice.
Yeah. First is Susie Wiles saying that JD Vance is a conspiracy theorist and has been for like a decade. Which fits with our point that like this guy is not Trump. He's trying to play Trump light, but it doesn't work. And then the second one, of course, is her saying that Trump has an alcoholic personality, to which Trump said she's absolutely right
By
yesterday.
the way, just want to say on a digression, she based that on her father, who's Pat Summerall, who was
Pat
Pat
Summerall.
Summerall. It was, can I say for the record that I'd forgotten that her father was Pat Summerall? If you look at a picture of Susie Wiles, she is like the spitting frigging image of Pat Summerall. I mean, it is stunning how much she looks like her father. Sorry, I didn't mention
And
that.
what's interesting from the Vanity Fair profile is apparently that is a huge reason that Trump likes her. Is
Yeah,
that
I'm not
everything
surprised.
is about 70s and 80s culture and
That's
70s New
right.
York, and Pat Summerall is like a touchstone for him.
Yeah, yeah.
And so he really likes Susie Wiles because she's Pat Summerall's daughter.
I mean, if you grew up
Um,
in the as we did in the 80s and 90s, Pat Summerall and
Summerall
John
Madden.
Madden were ubiquitous, right?
Yeah. I mean, literally, you knew it was a big game when you heard Pat Summerall's
Summerall.
gravelly
Exactly.
voice.
Exactly. Brian gets exactly right.
That was the thing.
That was
You
the sign
heard
of
Pat
credibility
Summerall.
for the game.
It
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
It was a sign of credibility, or it was Thanksgiving. That was it.
Yeah,
You heard
exactly.
Pat Summerall and
Exactly.
John Madden, and they were,
That's very
they were the
funny.
ones that when Fox got football in 1994, blew up the model of CBS and NBC having football and made Fox into a real network, or at least a network that people considered equal to the other ones. They knew they had to get Pat Summerall and John
Yeah,
Madden,
that's
or
right.
they wouldn't have
That's
any
right.
credibility. Otherwise, they went with all these like 20 something kids for play by play. But it was Pat Summerall was the one who gave him credibility. And of
Right.
course, every so often you'll see somebody tweet something where you hear Pat Summerall read the tease for Murder She Wrote in 60 Minutes, coming up next on CBS. And for a whole generation of kids, like that sends you back
It
to
does. It does. It
the
does.
days. But that was so that Susie Wiles is sort of in with Trump, is that when he found out that she was Pat Summerall's kid, it's one reason that he likes her so much. And
But why are
this
we talking
thing
but
is
let's say, why
interesting.
are we talking about Susie Wiles?
Yeah,
Can we just
okay. The Vanity Fair dropped this two-part profile by Chris Whipple, who wrote the definitive book on White House chiefs of staff, and they all
Yep.
talked to him on the record, including Dick Cheney, and he's very well regarded. And she sat for 11 interviews with him over a year, and he
11
11,
on the record
and he got
interviews.
a lot of other people in the administration talked to him, Rubio, Vance, among others. And here's the thing: first of all, I don't believe that she didn't know what she was doing. I think every one of these statements was intentional. I think that, first of all, everything she said was accurate. It was true, or at least the stuff that people are angry about. The stuff that where she was more positive about Trump, you can argue about the accuracy of it.
The
But
veracity. Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
veracity of the statements, and the praise for the cabinet, especially. She calls him my Bobby. If you want to throw up in your mouth. But the praise for Hegseth and Kennedy and people like that was ridiculous. But the fact of the matter is, I actually think that Susie Wiles was doing this to, first of all, cultivate credibility
Mhm.
with the media, because you know that she's back channeling the people, and this makes her, hey, look, I called Russ Voigt a right wing zealot. I call them like they are, kind of thing, but also to sort of protect her reputation as like the voice of sanity in the administration. And also, she's playing to an audience of one. This is maybe the most important point. She said nothing negative about
Yeah.
Donald Trump
Yeah.
himself. And
No, well,
secondly,
I
here,
mean, she said he had
she
an
made very
alcoholic's.
clear.
Wait. She said he had an alcoholic's personality. That is not a
But
redeeming.
if you read the full description of what she meant by that, it was he has this belief that he could do anything, that there's no limits on what he can do,
Yeah,
that
but
like
that isn't the way she
grandiose.
presents it. Is not completely. I mean, I'm basing a secondhand a little bit, but not totally a positive way. Uh,
But like when you read the full quote, it was a lot less negative than people are seeing it as. But she also made it very clear that previous chiefs of staff saw themselves as trying, first of all, with Trump's previous chiefs of staff, they saw themselves as having to stop him because it was in the national interest. Rubio said that in this piece. Okay. And she also talks about how all of her predecessors told her about that moment where either national security is at risk or there's something big brewing where you have to tell the president no. And you can't do this. This is really bad. And she said, I've had none of that. And she said, I see myself as a facilitator. My job is to make his agenda happen. And that's music to Trump's ears. I'm not like those other guys. I am,
yeah,
portraying myself as your conduit, the one who makes the things you want to happen happen. Didn't mean she didn't say anything critical about the administration, but all of that criticism, the harshest criticism was leveled at evil Elon Musk, who's gone.
yeah, that's
You
true.
know, Russ Voigt, who's a second tier kind of player. Um, that kind of thing.
I guess let me say this. Just, I mean, I just look. I think the explanation of everything this administration does is incompetence, and I think what you're suggesting is a level of competence that they've never been able to show, and I don't really buy it. But I will say this. I don't think that I don't think that that's a good point, Kelly. She said Trump is a passionate teetotaler and spoke openly about his familial alcoholism. He probably loved it because it reminds him he's better than others who are alcoholics. That's actually an interesting argument, by the way.
And he said that. He
Um,
said, look, I don't drink because I would be. I have an addictive personality. I mean, that's what
right,
he said
right.
yesterday.
It's the only moment of introspection he's ever engaged in is when it comes to addiction. It's funny. I always think about this funny moment from 2024 election when Theo Vaughn interviewed him. And Trump actually asked him about, because Theo Vaughn is a recovering addict, and Trump asked him about it. And I remember I sent it to a friend of mine. I said, I swear to God, this is the first time in my entire life I've ever seen Donald Trump ask somebody, like ever, like, show interest in somebody else's, uh, life experiences. And it's interesting that it's about addiction where he did that. But look, I'll just say for the record, like, I don't think it matters all that much because this administration, they can get rid of Russ Vought. They can just, I don't know, get rid of any number of cabinet secretaries. It's not going to make a goddamn bit of difference. It's like moving tech shares in the Titanic. At the end of the day, this administration is a cult of
Well,
personality around Trump, and he'll be judged by Trump. And if Trump is unpopular, and he is unpopular, then the administration will be unpopular, and Republicans in Congress will pay a price for that. Bottom
you're
line.
right from a political standpoint, but I do think getting rid of either Hegseth or Kennedy would do a substantial amount of good, given the anti-vaxxer shit that Kennedy's,
I don't think they're getting rid of
pushing.
Kennedy. I think Hegseth
No,
is the one more likely to go.
right,
And by
and
the way,
I do think that would improve national security because he's just incompetent. On top of being, awful, he's incompetent, and there are more competent versions where I wouldn't worry about, national security in the same way.
but yes, that's true. But I'll say about Hegseth, by the way, the thing that I was struck by is that I'm just going to say this. He's such an asshole. I absolutely fucking hate
Oh
what
yeah,
Hegseth. And what he said
Kennedy
about
might
those
be the
Susan,
only bigger asshole. Like,
but Kennedy's a kook and he's like a completely just insane, dangerous person. Higgins is just like personally an asshole. And I think thing he said about the Susie Wiles thing was he basically blamed on the left trying to manipulate people. Yeah, the left made her sit for 11 fucking interviews with Chris Whipple on the record. I
Like
mean, give me a
literally
break.
sitting
He
in
know.
her
I mean,
office
yeah. And you know what?
in the White House.
Hexus knows he's lying when he says that, by the way. I know down in my mind, he knows that's bullshit. Like, Kennedy's so insane, he'll say things that are untrue and ridiculous because he might believe them. Hexus knows he's just lying, but doesn't care.
He's
But I want to,
stupid and he's a liar.
yeah, he's a bad person. But I want to just move on to, well, there's two things we can move on. Can I talk about Venezuela? There's something else I was thinking about. We wanted to
Oh,
talk about.
there's a couple of other I can think of three other things, but one thing we should mention before we get to those three other things is that apparently our exalted leader is giving us an Oval Office address
Uh,
tonight, and it probably will be pretty boring and stupid because it'll
you
be
think it's
him
about
reading the
Venezuela?
prompter. No, 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 no. This is him touting the great first year. He wanted to close the year with some like, "Hey, everything is so great," speech to the country. So he's doing an Oval Office speech tonight that I assume he'll read it off the prompter, so it won't be batshit insane, but it will also be pretty boring and stupid for 15
I mean,
minutes.
I don't care and I won't
But
watch it. I don't.
no,
I mean, I look.
I'll
I
read
used
what
to.
he says later, but
Yeah, I don't really care. And what he says doesn't matter. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, maybe I should care more, but I found myself less and less interested in the day to days of politics because the big trend lines are the big trend lines and they're not changing. I
I,
mean,
the,
if, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to take us to one of the other topics. If you have something else to say,
No, not on that. What do you want to talk about next?
so you wanted to bring up Brown, and
Oh, yeah, I do want to bring up Brown.
also
Thank you.
I want to talk about the stuff with the House. We will get to the Republicans in a little bit, but the situation in Brown, horrific shooting, killed two students on Saturday, and they still I don't even know if they have a suspect at this
They
point,
don't have a
which
suspect.
is kind of crazy and unnerving. But the right has taken it upon themselves to be absolutely terrible, which shouldn't surprise us, given what they do. But they first of all have made this all about one of the two victims because she was the vice president of the Brown College Republicans. And JD Vance, sent
Her name
condolences.
was Ella
Ella
Cook.
Wood
Ella
or
Cook.
Ella Cook, I'm sorry. Yeah, Ella Cook. And they've ignored the other victim because his name is a lot harder to pronounce and he
And he's from
wasn't
Uzbekistan.
right.
And he's
He's from
Muslim.
Uzbekistan and he's
He was
yeah,
Muslim.
he was Muslim. So that was their first really terrible thing. The second really terrible thing is they've
Wait,
therefore
just to
inferred.
finish up on your point, like just to interrupt one thing, JD Vance tweeted out something about Ella Cook being killed and did not mention the other person who was killed. And I actually wrote a post about this in my class. They tweeted about it about a half an hour later after this was people mentioned why didn't you mention the other kid who was shot? He brought it up and said, well, his name hadn't been released yet. That was a lie because I actually retweeted something that pointed out it was a lie. But anyway, just pointing out that like this was a decision on the part to ignore the brown kid who was Muslim, and I say brown, I mean literally his skin color, who was killed, who was Muslim, and focus on the white girl who was a Republican, head of the
I
College
think she
Republicans.
was from
Sorry, go ahead,
Birmingham.
Brian. She
If
was from
I
Alabama. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But so the second terrible thing they did is a whole subset of the right, including several congressmen, lumped this in with Charlie Kirk and Donald Trump and decided that she was the target of this, which we do not in any way, shape, or form know
We
at
don't know.
this point what the motive was. And they've basically been stoking the incendiary fires of saying, well, the left just wants to kill us. And, we have to basically like stoking a culture war that could easily erupt into a civil war, and violence, and it is horrifically irresponsible for them to do this, and based on nothing. It's invented out of whole cloth.
I could not agree with you more, and I just want to endorse everything you just said, but and add to this that we do not know who the shooter was. We do not know. But there's a congressman from Ohio, Michael Ruley, I believe is his name.
That's the
Who,
guy I went at.
yeah,
Yeah,
he tweeted
I
out,
said that he needs to lose because of this.
right. He said the left tried to assassinate Donald Trump. In fact, the shooter was a Republican. The left killed Charlie Kirk. I don't know that. I mean, a person did, not the entire left. wing of American politics, and then said the left killed Ella Cook. Now, let's be clear. As you said, Brian, we don't know who the shooter was. The idea that you are going to blame an entire segment of the population for a death, you don't even know what the motive was or the suspect was. First of all, let's just say that it was someone on the left. It would be irresponsible to make that argument, forgetting in a vacuum. It's irresponsible to blame an entire political movement for the actions of one person. Like we don't. It's like a weird kind of not racism, but it's collective. What's it called? Indictment. Okay, but it's worse because we don't even know if the person was on the left. It's got so much worse.
Let's go beyond that. You can expect that from internet trolls.
Not
We are talking
congressman,
about a fucking congressman.
fucking member of
He
Congress. What the
like
actual hell?
you have a greater standard of responsibility. You're a congressman. This is the most, beneath the office. It's disgraceful. It's disgusting. It's
But
dangerous.
you are correct, but you know what? It wasn't just this guy in Ohio. Claudia Tenney,
No.
congressman from New York, she tweets out, "Oh, this is the left. This is what the left does." What does the left? It is basically what they're doing is they are politicizing a mass murder, and they are.
And,
And
and
by the way, the people who say you should never politicize mass shootings in America, that's what they are doing.
we're right.
They're
We're talking about
politicizing
the
a mass
same
murder.
people. And let's keep in mind these folks are the same ones who don't want to condemn Trump for Rob Reiner, even though they were calling for people to lose their jobs after Charlie Kirk.
300 people out of punishment because they didn't express enough reverence about Charlie Kirk.
That's right. And then they went a step further, Michael. They didn't just stop with this stuff. They went out there and did their internet sleuthing and found some person in the Brown community whose web
Uh,
page had been taken down, who was fit the right demographic groups for them to go after him. And they decided that this person must be the shooter and Brown was covering it up. Not understanding that, first of all, the university probably took this person's page down because the right was making
because
it, and they were getting
exactly.
threats and having problems with it, because that's what universities do. For those of you who are not involved in a university, they've developed a playbook of, hey, when somebody starts to get threatened and dogpiled on the internet, we take their email down, we take their information down so that they cannot further be harassed and threatened. And they decided that this was a sign that first of all, that the motive was radical Islamic terrorism, and that they were targeting the right. Like it fit every one of their little narratives so nicely, and they weave this story. Except there's only one problem: it had not a shred of truth to it, as based on what we know right now. Okay, they don't have a suspect. They don't know what the cause was. They sure as hell don't know that this was targeted at any individual and wasn't just a crackpot looking to shoot up a room. It is just the height of
And I
irresponsibility in
want to,
terms of
I agree.
politicizing tragedy, furthering polarization. Ugh,
No,
disgusting.
disgusting. And I want to just agree with you and just say, look, that they politicized the Charlie Kirk assassination and blamed the left for this which is, again, it's insane. We do not blame an entire political movement because of the actions of one person. Okay, and do you know what this actress Amanda Seyfried? I liked her a lot in the Elizabeth Holmes show. She had a really good thing. She got trolled online because she had basically pointed out that Charlie Kirk said horrible things when he was alive. And recently, somebody asked her. She's on like some press tour now, and she said, "Yeah, you know what? His death was a complete tragedy, and I feel awful for his family. He also said horrible things. You can say two things at the same time, and they're true. A lot of people said that. I said that. I said Charlie Kirk said some terrible things about people. And as I said at the time when he died, I think the biggest tragedy of his death, besides obviously for his effect on his children, his wife, and his friends and family, was that he would never get to evolve and grow. He was a young man. That's a tragedy. And you can acknowledge that this is tragic, and also acknowledge that this person was flawed, and this person had issues, and this person was not a perfect individual. That was true of Charlie Kirk. But what the Republicans did was they turned this into, oh, this is the left going after, this is the left, this is the response of their rhetoric. By the way, if you were talking about who in this country, which political party is more irresponsible when it comes to attacking their political opponents, isn't even a close call. It is the Republican Party, and it is in particular Donald Trump. This isn't even a question, okay? And so for them to then say the left killed this Ella Cook. We don't even know who the fuck. It's pathetic. And by the way, I'll make one last point. I'll bring up really quickly. I think about this all the time.
Well,
2019, a young man in El Paso, Texas, went to a Walmart that was predominantly shop. The consumers there were Hispanic, and he killed 20 something people in a mass shooting. And he wrote a manifesto in which he basically said he had been inspired by Donald Trump and his anti-immigration rhetoric to do this. If you want to talk about an example of rhetoric and then action, that's an example. I'll bring up one more because I wrote about it this week. What happened in Australia? Uh, this horrific shooting at Bondi Beach of 15 people, Jews celebrating Hanukkah, were killed. And I wrote this piece today on MSNBC. You can pick it, MS Now, excuse me. You can see, I mean, the rhetoric of globalized intifada, of attacking diaspora Jews. When you keep using that kind of rhetoric, you're giving permission structure to people who are more unstable, who are extremists, who are violent in their views. And, when you go around and say the left killed Ella Cook, the left killed Charlie Kirk, what are you doing? You're putting a target on the backs of the left. You are saying to people in your political coalition, you're giving them a permission to say these people are a danger and they're a threat. It is not just irresponsible, it is dangerous. And people are going to get hurt because of this. And they don't care because they can score political points for a couple of days. It is horrific.
I want to point out somebody retweet this. Aaron Blake from the Post retweeted this. The first tweet in the chain is Anna Paulina Luna, Congresswoman and General Nutjob from Florida, saying, "I find it very suspicious that information has been removed from Brown University's website following the tragic shooting." Then Harmeet Dillon, that is Assistant Attorney General Harmeet Dillon,
Harmeet Dillon.
retweeted that SUSS. That's it. That's what she retweeted. These are the people, these are elected Republicans. And look, the left has its issues. Michael just pointed out the rhetoric around Israel that's been bad. The congressional baseball shooting was a crazy leftist. Like the left is certainly not perfect in this, but liberals are much more willing to, in these moments, even have introspection and say, hey, we should tone it down. You never see that from Donald Trump and his bunch of frauds and nut jobs that are surrounding him. And it really is disturbing to see them politicize something that fundamentally there is no room for politics. And by the way, at the same time they were doing this, they were screaming at anyone who mentioned gun control as politicizing the tragedy. That's their go-to playbook. It is
I agree.
just
Agree.
so totally inappropriate. Um, that people are out there suffering and they're just making it worse, and they're
No,
doing it all and misleading people in ways that like a generation ago you would never have seen Congress people acting this way. You just wouldn't. It would have been something that their own leadership would have called for them to resign. that
I want to
that
make the point again, just so we're clear on this point. We do not know who the shooter was in the
right,
Brown University mass shooting.
we don't know
And
the
we do not know
shooters,
their motive. And we do not know their motive.
and we don't even know that they've identified a suspect at all. The fact that the crack job, or well, no, the FBI doing such a crack job has it brought somebody in and then they released him. So they got that one wrong, thanks to Kesh Patel and his
Yeah.
merry
By the
band
way,
of
Kash Patel, I
men.
suspect is not much longer for this job. I mean,
Well,
he went on.
Bongino is going to resign as early as this week.
Well,
He's
we'll
on his
see.
way out.
We'll see. The thing with Patel is that, look, he's incompetent. He never should have had the job. The Republicans who basically gave him, confirmed him, should be ashamed of themselves for many reasons. Look, the FBI. First of all, he put out incorrect information. They picked up somebody, a person of interest. The FBI, Patel, leaked this information. Turns out this guy was not responsible for the shooting. He was released. And then, and this is more timing because this happened before Sunday, but he did an interview with his girlfriend on Stephen Miller's wife. I can't remember what her name is,
Katie,
Frau Miller. And so she,
Frau Katie Miller.
yeah, Frau Katie Miller. Sorry, but whatever. She's married to like the worst person in America, so I'm fine with mocking her. She they did an interview with her, and it came out like on the day after the shooting, which of course just is a terrible look. It came out on Sunday, I think it was, which just makes it look like he's basically doing interviews about this girlfriend rather than actually investigating. Now I know that the interview was recorded before, but it's just one more bad look for Patel. And in general, like he's so clearly over his head in this job, and I do think at some point he may end up getting pushed out. It wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I would expect that as well because he's not as useful a tool because he's so bad at it. And creates controversy over like personal stuff. But yeah, I mean, this whole thing has just been really, 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 really bad, all around. And I keep saying to people I know who've been sending me these things, what is the harm in waiting to actually have facts? I know it's a quaint idea,
Because you're trying to
but
score, because you don't care about facts. You're just trying to
right,
score political
exactly.
points.
That's exactly right.
You're trying to score political points, and that's always been true. There's nothing new about that.
Yeah,
They were blaming the left for Charlie Kirk's murder before they even had a suspect in, before anyone knew what his motive was. And by the way, like it's interesting about that. It's like the motive, from what I've read, seems to be that the shooter in the Charlie Kirk incident had a trans girlfriend, and he was bothered by Kirk's rhetoric. Now, I'm just going to be clear, and I don't want there to be any question about this. I don't care if you're upset about his rhetoric. You don't shoot somebody, and this person who did this should spend the rest of his life in jail. There's not a
that's
question
exactly
about
right.
this in my mind. But I'm out for the death penalty, so just be put that to clear. I'm not qualifying it. He should be punished for what he did. You do not respond to bad speech with violence. But I think it's notable that it wasn't as if he wasn't inspired by the rhetoric of the left. He was inspired by the rhetoric of Charlie Kirk. That's what led him to do this. Now, again, I want to say it again, so no confusion. It doesn't make it acceptable. But let's be
Uh,
clear about what was the motivate here. It was not because he heard a bunch of people on the left say that Charlie Kirk is evil. He made that conclusion on his own mind.
Yeah, I would co-sign all of that. Um, did you see apparently there's a wall of plaques at the White House of for all the presidents. And we known that he had replaced Biden's picture with a picture of an auto pen, but he apparently rewrote these plaques um for Obama and for Bush. So Obama's plaque now reads Barack Hussein Obama was the first black president, which is racist in and of itself. A community organizer, one term senator from Illinois, and one of the most divisive political figures in American history. As president, he passed the highly ineffective Unaffordable Care Act, resulting in his party losing control of both houses of Congress and the election of the largest House Republican majority since 1946. He presided over a stagnant economy, approved the terrible Iran nuclear deal, and signed the one-sided Paris Climate Accords, both of which were later terminated by President Donald J. Trump. Under Obama, the ISIS caliphate spread across the Middle East, Libya collapsed into chaos, and Russia invaded and took Crimea in Ukraine. He crippled mall businesses with crushing regulations and environmental red tape, devastated American coal miners, and weaponized the IRS and federal bureaucracies against his political opponents. Obama also spied on the 2016 presidential campaign of Donald J. Trump and presided over the creation of the Russia, Russia, Russia hoax, the worst political scandal in American history. His handpicked successor, Hillary Rodham Clinton, would then lose the presidency of Donald J. Trump. They're so juvenile, and
Not a day goes by where they don't debase us as a country. Not a day goes by. It's
it
just awful.
really is unbelievable.
They're just
And
children. They're just
they
fucking children.
amended Bush's plaque to say that the Afghanistan Iraq war should not have happened. Um, and I think that yeah that's and mentioned the
And I'm
recession
seeing
just to
under
be that
Biden,
much pettier.
it says Sleepy Joe Biden was by far the worst president. I
I
mean,
mean, like,
these
are
are
you
just,
five? Oh,
yeah,
like
no, they are five. They are five. They are. And that's what's so sad about
I
this is that
shouldn't constantly be surprised, but and the ethos definitely comes from Trump. But Wiles really is the only competent person, with the possible exception of Stephen Miller, and that's even scarier because he's terrible. But like Stephen Chung and these Caroline
they're,
Levitt, they're
they're
just
just
a bunch
clowns.
of clowns.
They're a bunch of clowns. No, I
Uh,
agree with you. I agree with you.
but
Look, it's a tragic thing that we are a great country, and I believe America is a great country, and I love this country that we have these kinds of people in charge of our country right now. It is one of the great tragedies of my lifetime that this has happened, and I don't know how you wash the stink off of this. Hope
and
that we can.
There's an even bigger tragedy, which is that you have all these people who know better and have just allowed it to happen and have cottoned up to Trump and kissed his ass, and I'm talking about the Republicans in Congress. I'm talking about, every one of them and everybody responsible for this. It's they are debasing the country. They are literally doing the opposite of what the founders wanted Congress to do. It really just is terrible. And we're gonna have to do so much work to try to repair America after this. And I'm not sure that we ever undo all of the damage from this.
Well, it's tricky. I mean, I think this is I think about a lot actually. How do you go back to some kind of sense of normalcy? And I think the thing that, and I'm writing something longer about this. I hope to get it out somewhat soon. That I think the thing is you don't return to where it was before because you can't. I think one of the problems Democrats make quite often is that they're very wedded to this idea of norms and of the way things are supposed to be done. And then they do this, and then they end up losing power pretty quickly afterward. And I think Democrats have to rethink. And look, we had a big argument last week on this in our conversation, and it partly pushed me to write a piece I did for the Truth and Consequences. Which if you're not haven't signed up, you probably should do that right now.
Subscribe.
Truthandcons.com. Right after you do that, you can sign up at the World According to Brian, his Substack. But I wrote a piece talking about the decision, SCOTUS decision in the Texas redistricting case, which wasn't based on law, basically based on partisanship. And I made the case that Democrats really do just need to pack the court if they take back the Congress and the presidency in 2028. And my argument for this is really just that, it's twofold. One is that Democrats face a series of structural disadvantages. I talked about some of them earlier, but the way the Senate is apportioned, it's apportioned in a way that basically gives Republicans more power in the Senate than they should have. Something like 30% of the country voted for Senate Republicans, and they have like 52 or 53 seats, 83 seats. It's some crazy number like that. And so I made my argument was that Democrats need to, take steps to change the political structure and ensure that that disadvantage that they have no longer exists. The disadvantage, by the way, isn't just the Senate and also the House, by the way, is also malapportioned. It's the Electoral College, but it's the Supreme Court, which, you know, it has a it's conservative, dominated by conservatives in large part because Republicans have not abided by political norms. They did in 2016 when they didn't let Obama appoint a replacement for Antonin Scalia, and then they abridged that norm in 2020 when they put Amy Coney Barrett on the bench right before the presidential election. So I think what Democrats need to do is they need to stop thinking about gaining power and thinking that governing well and passing legislation will help them. History has shown us over and over again doesn't. The way that you actually increase your power is you need to wield power ruthlessly and effectively. And so that means A, you need to expand the Supreme Court. Well, first you need to make DC and Puerto Rico states. Give yourself 4 more senators, a bunch more congressmen. Then you expand the court, because if you don't, the Supreme Court will find some reason to overturn it. And then you do things like end partisan gerrymandering, protect the Voting Rights Act. I would go further. I would pass a constitutional amendment that gets rid of the president's pardon power. The point I'm getting at here is that you need to take steps to clean up the system, but also that ensure that Democrats are no longer in the minority. And if they win back power, they can hold power. And that's the thing Democrats haven't done very well. They have to get past this mindset that good policy equals good politics. It doesn't work that way. And until they learn, so this is why I'm saying you can't go back to the way things were before. You can't act like nothing has happened. What we've seen over the past 10 years, Republicans simply cannot be trusted with national power. By the way, I want to say one last thing about this. To say that we should have 4 more Democratic states, like by DC, 4 more Senate seats, Democratic and in Puerto Rico and DC states, is partly, yes, it'll increase Democratic power. And yes, that seems partisan, but it's not only partisan. It's because we can't trust Republicans to protect our democracy. We've seen that over the past 10 years. And if you can't trust them, you have to figure out ways to ensure that they can't get into political power again until they reestablish their loyalty to the basic democratic norms that we've known for 200 years in this country, more than 200 years. Sorry,
I
I went on a rant
I
there.
I agree with you in principle. I'd also add that there's reasons to make DC, Puerto Rico, Guam, and all of them states, which is that no American should have less representation than any other American. This idea of us still having territories in the year 20 fucking 25 is ridiculous. And so there's a real argument for that. And in so much as Michael and I were disagreeing last week, it's on a pretty narrow band of issues that revolve around how far do you go and do you worry about them getting power back at some point, etc. But I would also just add one irony to this, which is the guy who is most responsible for Democrats losing the Supreme Court was the one guy who really understood the need to wield power ruthlessly, Lyndon Johnson.
Oh, you make that argument all the time, and it's a good point about what happened with Abe Fortas, and it's a great point. But like, look, even then, don't forget it was a Nixon appointed judges, who what's it called? Passed Roe v. Wade, right? Informed that decision. So you had look. I mean, don't I always meant David Souter was a Bush appointed judge who ended up being one of the most liberal judges in the court's history. I mean, what's happened in the last 10 or 15 years is that the court has become more openly partisan in a way that would have been unimaginable in the eras of Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, right? People like Scalia and I mean obviously Thomas, but also Kavanaugh and Barrett. I mean they're naked partisans. Gorsuch also, and so that's the difference. Is that they're willing to just rule in a partisan way, and they know there's no consequences and no accountability, so they keep doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and for those who don't understand the argument of what I'm saying, Lyndon Johnson, first of all, bullied Arthur Goldberg off the court to put Abe Fortas on, who was his personal lawyer and didn't want to be on the court. He wanted to go
Wh-
make
Can
money.
you just remind people what he bullied him, what job he gave him?
Ambassador to the UN.
Fucking
Uh,
ambassador to the UN. I worked for the ambassador to the UN previously. That's a shit job, and it's unbelievable that he gave up a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court to be the frigging UN ambassador to the UN. Insane.
Johnson, it's a real sign of how potent Johnson's treatment was
What a
of
schmuck
people.
Goldberg was.
Yeah.
Jesus.
But so he gets Goldberg off, he puts Fortas on as Associate Justice. Then Earl Warren really blunders by waiting till the last year of Johnson's presidency to retire. He waited because he hated Richard Nixon from their days in Republican politics, and it looked like Nixon might become president, so Warren decides to retire. And Johnson decides he's going to make Abe Fortas Chief Justice, which opens him up to confirmation hearings on everything the court's done because he's already on the court. And then he chooses to appoint to Fortas's seat Homer Thornberry, who was a duck hunting buddy of Richard Russell, who was the Southern Senate power broker.
Who didn't make
Um,
it.
well, Thornberry didn't make it. What ended up happening?
There
I
were
did a
two
lot
of
of
them. Two of them didn't make it. Him and
re-
Carswell, I think his name was. Carswell?
well, no. You're talking about uh,
Nixon.
Nixon appointed Clement Haysworth and Harold Carswell.
Thank you.
Carswell was the worst appointment in modern history. He was an absolute racist with a
You're,
hugely high overturn rate.
wait, I'm sorry,
Um,
Brian. That is Harriet Meyer's, what's it called? Erasure right there. The worst
no,
nominee
no,
in
no,
Supreme Court
no. You
history.
know what? Harriet Myers was not a racist who turned her chair around when black defendants came into her courtroom.
That's
That
fair. That's a fair
th-
point.
Harold Carswell was a cretin. But anyway, so to finish the story, Johnson then refuses to order his attorney general to appoint a district court judge that Russell wants in Georgia. Ramsey Clark is dragging his feet on this because he thinks he might be a segregationist. Turned out to be wrong. But anyway, Russell says I renounce the deal that we had and helps to lead the opposition. And then they get to October. We have the first filibuster of a Supreme Court nominee or judicial nominee ever. They filibuster Fortas, and uh, Johnson doesn't have the brains to send up another nominee. There were people who could have been confirmed, including Goldberg, but also Tom, I believe was pronounced Keuchel, who was a liberal Republican senator from California. And they give Richard Nixon the chief justiceship. And then he uses dirty tricks to force Fortas, who was completely unethical, off the court. Um, and the reason that this matters is that Republicans have never ceded the chief justiceship since then.
Whoa, wait, but wait a minute, wait a minute. The person who ended up taking that seat, I believe, was Harry Blackman, wasn't it?
Eventually, yeah, the irony is the Fortas seat did not have to do with the balance of power. The seat that has affected the balance of power long term was the liberal Earl Warren becoming Warren Burger, William Rehnquist, and John Roberts.
Right. But that's
In
I
the
can't blame
chief seat.
Johnson for that. And just I want to say about A4s for the record. When I was working on my 68 book, about I was doing a lot of research on the sort of Vietnam, and what I didn't realize is that A. Fortas, who was a Supreme Court justice, used to go to the White House all the time
Oh
and was a
God, yeah.
basically member of Johnson's kitchen cabinet and was
Yeah.
way in on Vietnam. He's a fucking Supreme Court
And,
justice. It's
and
completely unethical.
and he lied about this during his confirmation hearings to be Chief Justice. Johnson kept calling him for advice like he always had.
Yeah.
And the irony is Fortas never wanted to be on the court. Mrs. Fortas wanted it even less because they liked the money he was making at Arnold and Porter. But it was a disastrous blunder that cost the left a seat, and then was compounded by the fact that Hugo Black wouldn't retire under Johnson. Like this all could have been nice and easy if
Well,
Hugo Black had just
I go back to what I
retired.
said. I mean, who took Fortis to sea? It was Harry Blackman, who was basically a liberal. I mean, more or less. I mean, he
Right,
did
right,
write.
right.
He wrote Roe v. Wade, the decision Roe v. Wade.
It's not the Fortis seat. The seats that tipped the balance of power from a liberal majority was Warren becoming Burger. It was Black.
Warren
And
Burger. That was his name also.
I,
Warren
I
Burger.
don't remember if Rehnquist got the Black seat or if that was Powell. There were two vacancies at the same time, so I don't know who got which seat. But the Black seat moved to the right. Black was a FDR appointee who, for some reason, hung on until like he died or was on his deathbed when Nixon was president.
But
That was the other big one.
I want to point. I want to make I want to point to
And
the
then
person
Marshall.
Marshall retiring during Bush's term, which is ridiculous that he did that. He could have retired. He could have waited. Although he could have waited. Um,
No,
but
no, he could have waited. He died like 4 days after Clinton was inaugurated. If he
yeah,
had held on to his
I know.
seat instead of Clarence Thomas, we'd have an actually competent,
I know.
ethical justice.
It's ridiculous. But I wanted to point out, by the way, that the person you really should be focusing your energies and animosity toward is Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
She's on the
And
list too.
I
I
want to
have a
just
list. I have a whole list.
I want to just point out this because in 2012,
Obama, Obama went to her privately.
right, in 2012, I mean, personally, I remember I wrote a piece in I was reading the Guardian at the time, arguing that was it no 2014? It was 2014. Arguing in February, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg had to step down from that seat because if by some chance Republicans took control of the Senate in 2014, which they did, then then Obama would not be able to appoint a replacement. They would filibuster whoever he appointed to fill the seat. And then if by some chance Republicans won the White House in 2016, which they did, they would appoint her replacement if she passed away during that president's term in office, which is what happened. And of course, I was just some guy writing a column for The Guardian at the time. Many people said this to her at the time, including, as you mentioned, Barack Obama. She refused to step down. She had cancer twice. Okay. She had lots of health issues. This was the smart tactical play. And what I made the point I made at the time was like, if you don't step down, you run the risk of everything you worked for, particularly on abortion rights, being undone. This is precisely what happened. And let's be clear on this point. If Obama had appointed a replacement in 2014, okay, and a liberal had that seat, Amy Coney Barrett never goes on the high court. And the Dobbs decision, which was 5-4, let's not forget, not 6-3, 5-4, because John Roberts voted with the minority. You do not overturn Roe versus Wade. She, because of her arrogance, because of her selfishness and her stupidity, basically undid her life's work. And I was struck with something very funny actually recently. This woman, Jennifer Welch, you know who she is? She's a podcaster. She has this podcast called I've Had It, or We've Had It, I think it is. These two women in Oklahoma, and they are a little misanthropic. I like them. Actually, my girlfriend is a big fan of them. I listen to them all the time, and so I used to listen to them. But they've gotten involved in politics now, and they are like big critics of Democrats, and they're just become very, very sort of left-wing critics of Israel and of Jeff King Jeffries and Schumer and so forth and so on. And I was struck by there was a recent profile from the New York Times, and the profile begins with there's an anecdote in the profile that in her apartment she has like a 10-foot photograph or painting of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I'm like, that is chef's kiss perfect. That this is a person who doesn't understand politics at all, who is like just always bashing the Democrats for not being as liberal as she is, then in loving someone like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is literally the reason why Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yeah.
She
And
is. I hate to say this. Her legacy. is
is
forever
tarnished.
tarnished by your
Yeah.
selfishness.
I wholeheartedly agree. And the reason I bring up Johnson and Black and Marshall when I'm talking about this was a collective decision. We had like a 7-2 liberal court in the 60s, and each of these individual decisions handed over seats, whereas the conservatives, and this is where I actually agree with you about ruthlessness and pragmatism, the conservatives make sure, Anthony Kennedy was the right used to bash the hell out of him. But meanwhile, he made sure to retire while Donald Trump was president. Sandra Day O'Connor, they hated. She made sure to retire while George W. Bush was president. It was they made sure to protect their seats. The liberals didn't protect their seats. They let them fall into the hands of the conservatives. And the only way that Michael or I will ever see a liberal majority Supreme Court is if there's court packing now because of
Yes.
this.
Yes.
Unless Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito listen to Donald Trump and then their health doesn't hold, then there's a slim chance that you could see a flip
I mean,
otherwise.
I will
But
say that the one possibility is that elite. I mean, look, you're basically you're saying if they die or not, if the next
right,
Democratic president, which you can't
right.
really predict, obviously. I do think that I'm curious to see if either one of them decide to retire next year.
Well,
Um,
I
are the
I,
off
I
chance
really
that
thought
Republicans lose the Senate?
I really thought Alito was going to retire in June. Thomas apparently wants the longevity record, which he needs like 2 or 3 more years to get for
That's right.
justices. By the way,
The worst, longest serving justice, is that what he was going for?
yes, I, I I really think that we ought to underemphasize something here, which is
Under
for
or
as much as
overemphasize?
or you cannot overemphasize.
Ah, thank you. Thank you.
You cannot overemphasize how much Republicans love to blame Democrats for breaking the court's norms, but it was them. And why do I say that? A Democratic controlled Senate gave Clarence Thomas a vote. There was no 60 vote threshold either. He was confirmed
You
52
got
to 48 despite two Republicans voting no. And I believe there were 57 Democratic senators. And a bunch of them crossed over to vote for him. And George Mitchell, the majority leader, and Joe Biden, the Judiciary Committee chairman, gave him a hearing. They gave him a floor vote, and they gave him a floor vote at a 50 vote threshold. Okay. Then you flash forward to 2015 or early 2016, and Mitch McConnell would not even give Merrick Garland a hearing.
Yeah, but in fairness, like when Clinton was president, Ginsburg and I think Breyer. I don't remember who controlled the Senate when Breyer was
Democrats,
nominated. Did he? Okay.
Democrats.
Are you sure? He was
Republicans
not.
haven't,
No. Republicans controlled the Senate. No, from
no.
2014 on. I mean, from 94 on, didn't they?
Right, but Breyer was 94. His vacancies were 93 and 94, I believe.
Got it. Got it.
I think the last time Republican controlled Senate, I don't know that there is a Republican controlled Senate that confirmed a Democratic nominee because Republicans didn't control the Senate from 54 to 80.
Wait a minute.
Um,
Sotomayor and Kagan.
they were under Democratic control.
Are you sure? I don't think that's
Yeah,
right.
it was 2009 and 2010, I believe.
Was it?
Souter
Okay.
Souter retired in Obama's first spring. Sotomayor was appointed that summer, and then Stevens retired the next spring before the midterms.
Okay. Okay. I
And
stand corrected.
Democrats held the Senate anyway
You're
for the
right. I'm
2 years.
sorry. You know what? You're right. You're right. They held the Senate until
So
2014. Sorry, I got that. I forgot.
I I don't know that you'd certainly have to go back to like Cleveland at very least, and I don't know that it happened then, but I
Well,
don't believe there was any 20th or 21st century Republican Senate that confirmed a Democratic Supreme Court nominee off the top of my head
I mean, the
that
number
I
of
can think
times
of.
if you go before Clinton, number of times when you had a Senate, a White House president, and a Senate controlled by Republicans, I can't even think of when that was. I
No,
don't
it
think it
wouldn't have
happened.
happened
It wouldn't have
under F.
happened.
Hold on.
No, I don't think it happened in the 20th century actually, because there was pre
No,
FDR.
because
There was only Wilson was Democratic president.
well, you know what? There's a possibility that Truman had a couple because
No,
he
but
had a
Republican didn't control the Senate.
didn't they control the Senate the first 2 years of Truman? I
They
believe they
controlled
had,
it
or the
no
second 2 years. I
second two
think they
years. I
had
think it
2
was.
years that they controlled it. And I remember, Truman's appointments were awful. They were a bunch of cronies, including a Republican senator from Indiana, Harold Burton.
But the
Um,
large yeah, the larger point is that no one would have filibustered it back then. It just that wouldn't have
right.
happened.
No,
That's a
Fortis,
modern thing.
that 1968 is the first filibuster against a judicial nominee. Okay, and before that, they didn't even have hearings into the 40s.
But
Or
I
maybe it
think
was
if I remember correctly on Fortis, there were Democrats who opposed his nomination too because he was
there
so clearly
were,
corrupt.
but actually it was the Southern Democrats. It was the Southern Democrats and a
Yes.
group of Republicans, and it wasn't even really an ideological group of Republicans. One of the leaders was Howard Baker, and the irony was that Johnson thought he had smoothed his nominations out because he got the support of Everett Dirksen, the Republican Senate leader. What was ironic was Dirksen couldn't even bring Howard Baker along, who was his son-in-law.
Wow, I didn't
Um,
realize that. Okay.
yeah,
But I
that's Dirksen's son-in-law.
but just to
Um,
summarize the point here, like where we are now, which is that we have, six conservative judges. Three of them were appointed by Trump. Three? Yeah, three appointed by Trump, even though he never won, even though he didn't win a majority of the popular vote, and that happened. Um, and and they are ruling in an only partisan manner. I don't think anybody really questions that at this point. And um, excuse
Bless
me.
you.
Sorry, thank you. So I think from that perspective, you just can't. It's just impossible for Democrats to they can't accept this reality of a Republican-controlled Supreme Court that rules in a partisan manner, and they have to do something about it. And if they're not willing to pack the court, here's the bottom line: if they're not willing to pack the court, they are going to be stymied in their hopes or efforts to push their policy agenda. Right? I mean, the same administration that basically, the same Supreme Court that basically said the president has almost excluded immunity to break the law, said that Joe Biden can't forgive student loans. It's ridiculous. Listen, though, I apologize. I actually need to run. I need to jump off. So I'm
Wow.
sorry. We are at a point now. It's almost 3 o'clock, and I have to be somewhere right after 3 o'clock. So I have to jump off. I forgot about this. Just got a reminder on my thing that reminded me I have to be there. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
And we
This
will
Brian. Go ahead. Yeah.
next week we will talk about Hakeem Jeffries' big tactical victory today. We will not forget this. We will come back to it because it was a
Oh,
pretty short move
sorry.
that he
Yes.
got. But I'll leave everyone with this. Part of the opposition to Fortis in '68, Strom Thurmond brought in a bunch of coin-loaded porn machines, and they had like peep shows in the Senate for senators to see the smut that Abe Fortas thought was okay to have. That this was part of the fight against Fortis. So I'll leave you with that fun
I'll
anecdote.
leave you with my favorite Strom Thurmond story. When I worked in the Senate many years ago, I worked for Chris Dodd, who was friends with Strom
Did you make
Thurmond.
mistakes of getting in an elevator with Strom Thurmond?
Uh, I did well. I'm a man, so I'm okay. But
I know.
Dodd and Thurmond were friends because Strom Thurmond had voted not to censure his father, Thomas Dodd, when he was a senator from Connecticut, which something that Dodd, pretty much anyone who was on his side, including like John Tower, for example, had done the same thing, and I think he voted to confirm Tower Secretary of Defense in 1989. Anyway, um, I was with Dodd. We were in the Russell office building, and Thurman pulls up in his car. He gets out, and he was like about 100 at this point, and he had like his pants pulled up to like about here. He had this really funny way of walking, and he was running for reelection. And Dodd says, "I hear you down there in South Carolina," and he goes, "I'm shaking the hands and I'm hugging the women." That was my memory of Strom Thurmond. I'm hugging the women. He was doing more than hugging, I can assure you.
It
Anyway,
was lecherous as it gets. But tune in
lectures
next
to the
week. We're
kids.
going to have a Christmas Eve edition of Two Bearded Jews
Two
for
bearded
you.
Jews. Absolutely. And have a great week, Brian. Happy Hanukkah to you. I hope you're
Happy
doing
Hanukkah to
well.
you.
And I hope everyone out there is having a nice holiday season so far. And I know it's tough out there, but, you know, we'll make it. I promise. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next
Take
week.
care.
Bye bye.